Hello and welcome to a new episode of Las Platicas. These are the episodes we share on our YouTube video. And who do we have in studio today, Kristen?
Well, yes, like Sarah said, welcome to another episode of Las Platicas, which is a show hosted by us, Comadres y Comics Podcast, where we meet with creators and friends to talk about upcoming projects, events, and all-around awesome news in the Latinx comic community. Joining us today are Kevin Garcia and Emmanuel Valtierra. Kevin teaches high school journalism and graphic design and used to work as a reporter for an AP-affiliated paper. For 10 years, he researched and wrote prose for Marvel Comics as part of the official handbook of the Marvel Universe team. I love those books. I love learning about all kinds of characters you've never heard of before. Manuel is an artist who has worked on several art projects, the vast majority of which were inspired by Aztec art. He's even made his own Codex Valtierra, which is an alternate history of the Aztecs defeating the Spanish told through a fold-out codex. I looked it up. It looks so cool. I want one. Together, Kevin and Emmanuel have created. Now, you might have to correct me. We've all gone around and around about how it's pronounced, but I want to say Teoatl.
Teoatl.
Teoatl. See, Jen says it so amazingly. Okay, again. Teoatl, a graphic novel depicting the birth of the Aztec Empire as a sword and sorcery tale. They are here today to tell us more about their book and the Kickstarter that is currently live and raising money to publish it. So welcome, Kevin and Emmanuel.
Thank you so much
for being here.
Thanks.
Awesome.
I'm so excited. So yes, so just a little pre-story about the journey from us emailing you and you coming on today. We saw, I think in the Latinx and Comics group or somewhere, I don't know, but we saw your Kickstarter was gonna start soon, and just it sounded so cool and so amazing, and Jen was like, we have to have them on, and so then Sarah emailed and reached out, and here you are today. So we're super excited to hear all about this project and more about the Kickstarter. But to start, we want to have you talk to us about okay, so you've both talked about how Teoatl.
So it's a combination of two terms. Actually, no, it is its own word, but there's Teo, which is basically
Teo.
God, spiritual,
Yes.
holiness. It could have a lot of different connotations. And Atl, which is water. There's Teoatl.
There you go, Teoatl. Thank you for bringing it out for me. So, so you've both talked about how Teoatl is the first time that either of you have created a comic. So can you just start by telling us how you began your journey into the comic book world, just from beginning to end? What is your origin story?
Well, I mean, I grew up just with Ninja Turtles and then X-Men and a bunch of other Marvel comics, and I was just all into that world then. And then when I got to college, I became a professional writer, and online I would kind of communicate with other, comic book fans that were also writers. And around the mid-early 2000s, Marvel reached out to some fans and said, hey, since you are already doing research on these characters anyway, why don't you revive our official handbook of the Marvel Universe and write this out? And I asked the guys, hey, bring me with you. And they're like, we don't know you well enough. They didn't take me with them. But then about 5 years after that, they reached out to me for some research that they knew I had. And I said, look, I've been a professional writer now for many years. Can I also write for you? And they were like, fine. So then I worked with them for about 10 years. And I got to do stuff like, the handbook. And I got to write, for a name more. I did the last 7-8 pages of this book.
Nice.
But the thing is that when I say this is my first time doing a panel-to-panel comic, it's because most of my work for Marvel was prose, where I'm writing, just the text. And I did get to write in characters' voices, like in this one, I got to write as Captain America, writing a letter to President Obama, but I didn't, do panel-to-panel stuff. That's something that has always been a dream of mine, but I'm, busy with teaching and other things, so I never really did that. Emmanuel, how'd you get started with comics?
Well, I mean, to be honest, this is the first time I work with them. You have a long background, and I'm just like, I don't know, I started 2 months ago.
That's not entirely true, though, because you've been doing some webtoon stuff. It's just barely starting, but I like what you're doing.
Nice.
Well, yeah, that's true. I mean, would you put that into the
Froze a little
comics field?
Absolutely.
Yeah, kind of. I mean, I always wanted to draw comics since I was like maybe 5 or 6 years old. But then again, I mean, I went to school for graphic design, and then after that, I
That's so
started
amazing.
drawing, but never a comic. I tried once on a Kickstarter, like maybe about 7 years ago, and I felt I'm like, you know what? Like, I don't want to do comics. Let's just like draw for books or like draw for like playing cards. And then, well, I met Kevin, and he's like, well, we should totally do this. And I'm like, well, why not? And
How did you guys meet?
yeah, that's pretty much it.
Well, you mentioned that you heard about
How
us
did we
through
meet, Kevin?
Latinx Comics on Facebook, which I think is Kat's group.
Yes.
And we met at a Latino Comic Convention. I want to say, was it the Houston one we met at? I don't even remember.
No, it was Dallas.
Dallas.
No,
Okay.
wait, 2 years ago? Yeah, 2 years ago.
Yeah, it was like we met like 2 years ago, and then like a year ago, he heard me talk because a lot of my talks, I give talks at Comic Cons. Sometimes I'm hosting people talking. Sometimes I'm doing the talking. And when I talk on my own, I'm usually talking about mythology and legends and stuff. And I've always had a passion for Mesoamerica. And he heard me talking about that, and he's always had a passion for the Aztecs. And he just came up to me and said, "We should do a project together." You know.
That's awesome.
Well, you wanted to do Mayan.
Yeah, I wanted to do
Well,
Mayans
like,
because I
yeah.
find Mayans to be a little bit more like there's a broader field of stuff that we could do, but because they have like the older glyphs and stuff. But for Aztecs, there's much more modern writing on it, and of course, as Emmanuel says, they're more badass.
So
Yeah.
is it really as simple as that? Is that how Teoatl came to be? Just both of you kind of like
Well, that was the
meeting each
beginning of the
other?
conversation. That was the beginning of the conversation. So once we said, okay, it should be related to Aztecs, I made one suggestion for a story, and Emmanuel said, no, I just did a book project that was similar to that. And then I said, well, I've always wanted to retell the origin of Tenochtitlan because this is a story that is not often, I've not seen it told in U.S. comics. There were some cartoons in Mexico that were made that were great. There's some on YouTube you can watch. But it's not a story that's told in the U.S. a lot. And I felt like that was something we could do. And Emmanuel just really wanted to dive into that world as well. So that's what led to that. Yeah.
Nice.
That's super cool. What inspired your interest in Mesoamerican mythology, and what about the comic book medium made you that choice in sharing your story?
Well, for me, it was since I was little. Also, I was living in Mexico. I'm Mexican American, but I moved to Mexico maybe when I was like 3 or 4 years old. So elementary, they will teach us about the Aztecs and the Mayans, and I was a kid in the classroom that was always drawing. That was me. You know, drawing my classmates and my professors. So there was something about the Aztec drawings that I always liked. They were different. I know they weren't realistic, but there was something about it, something special. So since I was little, I was drawing that. I mean, I liked them a lot. Like I remember myself drawing Tlaloc or drawing Quetzalcoatl from the textbooks, right? And then I grew up, and when I was older, I didn't draw that, but like then I realized nobody was doing it. Like, yeah, how come nobody draws this way, or how come nobody really focus into the Aztec culture? I mean, it's being left behind. And there was probably only one person I found online that was drawing like Mayan Pokemons. You know what? I should totally do the same with Aztec. You probably seen them.
Is
Probably,
it
yeah, I'm
Ishtel?
just gonna give it a shot. I don't remember, but I'm talking about like 8 years ago. Somebody was doing like Mayan Pokemons, and
Yeah.
I believe that person is still like drawing like Mayan.
I believe
anyways,
it's Ishtel. Yeah.
Maybe you might be right. It was a lady, right?
Mhm.
Yeah, you might be right. So, anyways, I'm just gonna give it a shot. I mean, I don't think nobody's gonna follow me, like just for fun. I mean, it's gonna take me a day just to draw. Like, I believe the first one that I made was a Michael Jackson cover art of Dangerous. Like I put like Aztec and Mayan, like I combined both. Like I was just doing it like for fun. And suddenly I had like 150 followers on Facebook. I'm like, okay, well, this is my
That's
work.
awesome.
Yeah, and then more people came, and then yeah, I mean, it was fun. And that's how I got into it, to be honest.
That's pretty awesome.
Actually, my start is different, but my ending is very similar. In that, I have always been fascinated with other cultures, specifically the belief systems and the stories, the legends, the myths. I a little personal thing. I don't like it when people use the word myth to mean fake, because yes, that's one of the definitions. But to me, myth is somebody somewhere believes it, or they used to believe it, or they still believe it. And that's what makes the difference between a myth and Harry Potter. Nobody believes Harry Potter's a real person, I hope. But other people believe it. And it doesn't matter to me if it's real or not. That's not important. All that matters is there's that belief system behind it. And being obsessed with this, I would see everywhere, Hercules and Thor and all these things. But, I always have my family talking about our ancestry and going back far enough. My great-grandmother was 100 everybody said she was 104 when she passed away. Her green card said she was 97, but everybody agrees she lied on it. But the thing is that everybody said that she was directly descended from, that. And I just felt, why is it that everywhere in the world, if you say Hercules, people know who Hercules' dad is. And if you say Thor, everybody knows what Thor's hammer is. But why not Huitzilopochtli? Why not Tezcatlipoca? Why can't these cultural icons be known around the world? And so that was always something that I wanted to do more of. In fact, when I worked for Marvel, I think you mentioned it, some of the profiles I did, I said, if the Mayan or Aztec gods are coming up, let me write those. So I got to write the profiles for some of them. And so that was just a passion for mine. And I just always wanted to make, it doesn't have to be me. I just want to see these systems, these beliefs become more well-known in the world, And in fact, somebody was telling me the other day, aren't you worried there's somebody else making a comic about Aztecs, somebody else making about Mayans? I'm like, no, the more the merrier, there should be more creators making these stories. Definitely more of that.
And the thing is, maybe Tlaloc, Tezcatlipoca, Huitzilopochtli there as good as Thor or as Hercules, as you said. Sadly, most of their stories were burned out by the Spaniards. So, I mean, whatever's left is as good as the Greek or yeah. Well, now imagine if we actually had all the content that we should that disappeared 300-400 years ago or whatever. So it's kind of sad, but I mean, we're trying to keep it alive.
That reminds me. There's a meme of are you still upset over the burning of the Library of Alexandria? That means you're a real nerd. And then Emmanuel and I were we're still upset over the Spaniards burning the codices. That's what we're mad about.
Mm-hmm. I completely understand that. So you kind of addressed it a little bit, but can you please tell us more about Teoatl and where some of the main points and ideas that you wanted to impart to your readers? We actually had a previous interview with somebody, Greg, who is doing Iznana, and he is kind of trying to breathe in a new life to Haitian mythology and stories and stuff like that. And I can't help but feel like this is what you guys want to do as well. You want to impart a knowledge of not only the gods, but of icons. I know my parents are indigenous Maya, and I grew up with stories about Tekunuman and the Quetzal and about all these other figures and stuff like that, that while I personally know, a lot of people don't know about them and about all these stories. So I really like what you guys are doing with this, that you kind of want to impart this knowledge that not a lot of people know.
Well, I mean, that's the idea. The idea is that there are certain surface things. Like if I mention Quetzalcoatl, people are like, oh, so he's the most powerful god, right? I've heard that. And his brother is Tezcatlipoca, and that and he's the evil one. And I'm like, kind of, no, not really.
They're very Western views.
Yeah, they try to make them like a pantheon, like the Greek pantheon, and they try to do. And the thing is, those one-to-one translations don't work, and also it's different depending on the culture and the time period, how it's all viewed. But for researching this, there's a lot of going through. I was talking to David Bowles, who's a professor, and he's also a writer. He writes books about these topics, and we were talking about the idea that he has gone into the field a lot and talked to modern Nahuatl and modern cultures and asked them about how their present day beliefs are, but we're looking at the culture of 400-500 years ago, and it's different. we're trying not to let it be forgotten, basically. And there are sources that have more information, but it's just they're not readily available. And when I say readily available, I mean especially to an American audience. To be blunt, to a Western audience. You know what I mean? To the European audience, to a Japanese audience, for that matter. If you look up anime Quetzalcoatl, you're going to get some interesting pictures. But it's not readily available. So I'm like, I would like to bring more of that to the forefront. In the research of this, I knew like the basic bare bones of some of the story as I'd heard it about the founding of Tenochtitlan. And once we decided that was the story we were going to do, I spent like 2 months just nothing but research. I read several books written by friars and people during the colonial time, because those were the earlier ones. I wanted to get that kind of unfiltered story where it's like, that doesn't mean it's true or real or even the one that the people believed, but this is the earlier versions before they started doing, more present research. And of course I looked at present research, and I looked at where different versions of the story matched and where they contradicted, and even like in Duran's where it kind of contradicts within itself constantly, and it's just like, there was a kernel of a great story there. And part of making it feel more real, the focus of our story isn't the gods. The focus of our story is the people. But the gods are there, and it was just about trying to bring that forward.
Yeah, I gotta give it to you, Kevin. After you finish your investigation, you gave me a lot of things that I never heard before, like all those names, all those things that happened. When you told me you wanted to do this, I thought you were gonna go with the pilgrimage scroll.
Yeah, like starting from wherever they started. It depends on the version where they started from too.
But then you came out with all this stuff, and I'm like, ooh, well, I mean, this is actually really good. I mean, I wasn't expecting it. So yeah, I'll give it to you. I mean, you did a great job.
How did you come to the name Teoatl? Oh, sorry.
That was a whole long process, because originally in fact, I think my first draft of the name was just like serpent and eagle, just because that's the icon that people are familiar with, and I was just going to just throw that out there. And then over time we went through like many different names, and because this is like, I've been doing research and Emmanuel's been doing drawings, the whole plan was that we 50-50 kind of have to kind of agree on what things would be. And
rejected like 20 different names, right, Kevin?
Oh, we went through so many different names, so many. And then I was reading a book written by a Mexican archaeologist, a woman from the 1960s. And in the book, she had that term, Teoatl, as meaning blood of sacrifice. And I couldn't find it in other sources, and it's not the usual meaning of the word today. And I asked David about it because he's much more familiar with the language and the history of it as he goes through. And he was explaining to me that it could mean the blood of sacrifice as part of like a longer metaphor, where it's like the blood that is sacred, because it's water for the gods, basically. And even gods in the European sense, but you get the idea. Water for the spirits, water for, the greater powers. And I love that idea. And when I mentioned it to Emmanuel, he immediately liked that idea. And so in the story, because, and this is something I wanted to touch on real quick, a lot of the modern tellings, a lot of people I know, friends of mine that are making comics that are about, these Mesoamerican cultures, they either try to avoid or minimize elements of sacrifice, but every version of the story that I've read that is the founding of Tenochtitlan has, if not one, multiple types of sacrifice. So we're not going to show any one more than once, but we are going to show more than one. And that's part of it. But it's also a process of finding the island in the middle of Lake Texcoco. So they are going to go crossing some sacred water. So there are multiple meanings for that term. And it did, once we settled on it, it did kind of apply to the whole thing, so.
Mm-hmm. That's great. That's fascinating. I love it.
So tons of people are excited about this project, and it is shown in the fact that you've already met your Kickstarter goal to get Teoatl published. So congratulations on that. But we want to get you more supporters and more followers and more people reading about this mythology that you want to impart upon people. And so we want you to talk to us and our listeners a little bit about the current campaign and what are some of the rewards that a backer can earn if they back this Kickstarter.
Sure. Well, we have different tiers, and the most basic one is $5, I believe, right, Kevin? And you get a PDF version of the comic, and it comes with sketches and with Kevin's investigation, some extra. Then we got the real comic, and
physical one.
Yeah, physical one. And then what else? We have a comic.
We have a couple of tiers that have already filled up, although we talked about maybe doing something later, which were involving you doing, like you said, the Pokemon portraits, but doing portraits of either the backers or whoever they want in Dakota style.
Fantastic. Yeah. And we have the one with the postcards also.
Yeah, and honestly, it's like as of right now, the most of the money is to support the publishing of it and the time of the research and something I've talked about a lot with my friends is that artists like Emmanuel usually rely on Comic Cons for or just in-person events in general to show their products and find new customers and find new patrons, and there haven't been any since March. So it really it's necessary for that, you know. But as we expand, we have postcards added. We have the possibility of making stickers, maybe later on posters. But we're figuring out where we can expand beyond that. The ultimate goal is to have not for this one probably, unless something magical happens and we just suddenly get tons of money. But the ultimate goal after this, not immediately, because we have another project we're working on next.
The whole graphic novel,
the entire graphic novel, and do it as a complete epic. So instead of trying to do like funding issue after issue after issue, because I don't think that would be very successful, I want to show people this is the first one, this is where we want to go, and then have the finished version and be like, this is it, this is the whole thing.
Great. Jen's already foaming at the mouth for it.
I'm very interested in it.
That is super cool. I've always liked to have because as independent creators and artists, sometimes it takes a whole year for you guys to release the second issue and another year to release the third issue. And so I think that's a great idea to just release the whole trade paperback all at once. That's kind of first time I've heard that. So that's pretty cool. How do you guys how do you define your identity as Latinx creators, and how does that definition drive the creative process behind your stories and characters?
So actually, Emmanuel and I were talking about this earlier, and this is something that I was raised in an area where the term Hispanic was super common, to the point that when I first heard Latino, I'd heard it before, but when I first heard it used with people, it just felt very strange to me. But then I met people from other areas that found Hispanic to be very offensive, because they're like, it's made by the government and it ties specifically to Spain, but so does Latino. In fact, I used to, when I was a kid, I used to say I wanted to call myself mestizo. My dad is very dark-skinned, Hispanic. My mother is of Scottish descent. So it's like I felt myself being of two worlds, so I would rather use that term, but even that term has meaning behind it. I finally, as an adult, have gotten to the point where as long as the community stands together, I don't really care or have a strong connection to a particular term, because the term is not nearly as important to me as the community. And I understand with Latinx that it is more inclusive to a lot of friends of mine that did not associate with Latino or Latina. And so it made a lot of sense. And so I personally say, again, just as long as the community stands together, that's what matters to me. And that's why I go to all the Latino Comic Cons in Texas that I can go to. I keep trying to talk to the people in California to bring me over there. It hadn't happened yet.
Yeah, I'll be honest. I don't see myself as a Latinx or Latino or Hispanic. I feel Mexican. Even though I was born here in Texas, I was raised in Mexico since I was not a baby, but very, very young. So yeah, I feel myself as Mexican. I don't see myself as a Latino or Hispanic. And then again, the relation of that with my work, I don't think is related at all. I want to believe that even if I was white or African American or Asian, I will still like this the same, and I will do this because I really like it for what it is. Like I never thought, or like this thought never came to my head, like, oh yeah, because I'm Mexican, I'm gonna do this. Like I do it because I really like it. Like I'm being honest about this. So that's what I'm saying. Like maybe I could be from China, and I'll be like, you know what, Aztecs, they're badass. I'm gonna work about them or with them. So yeah, that's just the way I see it. But I might be wrong, and maybe it's because I'm Mexican.
You know, there's a whole lowrider kind of culture in Japan where they like dress up like cholas and cholos, and
I
they have
saw that.
lowriders. Isn't that crazy?
There's a lot of subculture, especially in Yoyogi Park there in Tokyo. I went there years ago, and it's always interesting.
Yeah.
Really?
I know they like wrestling, like Mexican wrestling, a lot more than the American one. I might be wrong.
I think there's a strong connection between. This is when you say that, it made me think there's a strong connection between the culture of luchador in fiction, and the way that the masked hero is shown in Japan. And the way I argue with people is that when a luchador or even a masked hero in Japan puts on a mask, it's not to hide their identity; it's to show who they really are. And that's why El Santo and Blue Demon never take off their mask, because it doesn't matter who's under the mask. That is who they are. And I think there's a strong connection between that and the masked hero tradition in Japan, which is very different from the masked hero tradition in the U.S. So.
Mm-hmm.
And I think today's the birthday of El Santo. Like he would have been 108.
I saw that.
Yeah.
I can't believe I didn't know that. I'm upset at myself for not knowing
Too
that.
many famous people, man. We cannot know all the birthdays.
Yeah, but he's important.
Yeah. I just wait for Facebook to remind me of all this stuff.
Yeah.
I know, that's exactly like Facebook. Somebody on Facebook should have said something.
I saw it on Facebook.
I saw it on Facebook too.
It must be
There you
true.
go.
If it's on the internet, it must be true.
Oh yeah.
So, are there any plans to create other books with more mythological and spiritual creatures? Like, but after
After we complete this book?
after you complete this one, like, do you already have an inkling of something else that you would like to write or that you couldn't expand upon in Teoatl?
Well, we don't have any books coming up. Like we have a completely different project, but it's still related to the Aztecs. We're working on our RPG, kind of like Dungeons and
Ooh.
Dragons.
Wow.
Nice.
Like a Dungeons and Dragons board game type thing.
Yeah,
Mhm.
so that's what we're working on. Kevin is gonna be writing the campaigns, or how do you call them, Kevin?
I was saying
Campaign.
scenarios would be a better word.
Yeah, all right, and of course I'm gonna be yeah, whatever.
I'm a big gamer, so it's like there's different, like what you call things are different in different types of games.
Yeah, and of
Mhm.
course I'm gonna be working on the art, which I already almost finished with all the art. So
Ooh,
we're gonna be
wow.
working. Yeah, we're gonna be working on the stories together, and hopefully we will release it on Kickstarter again, maybe by March next year. or
Sometime next
April.
year,
Yeah,
early next year. Yeah,
Nice.
that one is really like I say, Teoatl is like us together. This one is really Emmanuel's baby. But as soon as he told me about it, I was like, that is something that people will like.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
I was comparing it to, I think it's called the Betrayal of Hill House, I think is that.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Where you kind of like have different scenarios where you're not like Dungeons and Dragons fully, where you just have paper and roll dice, but there's actually a board and where you could go and what you could be doing and interacting with, but all built around. By the way, we keep saying Aztec over and over again. In the story, we have like a narrator who introduces the book, and he's like some fictional nameless colonial era historian. He says Aztec, but in the story, nobody says Aztec.
Mhm.
You know, they call each other Mexica. They don't like, he may say the king, but in the story they say the speaker. You know, so there's a lot of that. But so Emmanuel's game is entirely built around this Aztec concept of like, man against the gods, and also making it really just kind of a cool interaction.
Yeah.
That sounds awesome.
Now
It
I
will
want
be.
to do the next comic project that I want to do after this is later on the line. Sometime next year I want to do it. I also would like this to be inspired by Mesoamerican mythology, but I wanted to make it more contemporary and make it more of like modern kids kind of interacting. So it's entirely like similar in terms of theme, but an entirely different feel from like the blood and guts and sword and sorcery of Teoatl. Instead, it's going to be more teenagers and angst and that kind of stuff.
Nice.
Oh.
More YA mythology.
Yes, actually.
Yeah.
In fact, my stated goal that I've been telling people is I want to aim for the same kind of like audience that reads the YA webtoons. You know, that's what I want to have. That kind of a feel to it. You know.
The people who
It's
read
the
Lore
largest
Olympus.
growing.
Yes.
group
Well,
of-
Lore Olympus, yeah, but there's a lot of other webtoons that I read too. I need to catch up on Lore Olympus, but I do read a lot of
It's
those.
so good. It's
I
so
know.
good.
As soon as I saw it, I was like, I'm gonna love this, but I'm gonna love it so much I'm gonna wait.
I caved and I fast pass all the time for that series. It's my favorite series on there. There's like a bunch of other ones, but that one is like my favorite one.
Well, my
Nice.
goal is to take other stories from Mesoamerican lore and kind of retell them with modern characters. Kind of like the way I would compare it is like Dragon Ball is retelling the Journey to the West. You know, where there's the Monkey King and his pig companion that shapeshifts and all this other kind of stuff. But they threw him in the modern world, and I want to do that kind of a thing. So
Nice.
I think you already sold it to 3 customers, so we can't wait to see both of those projects. So as a Latinx creator and a Mexican creator, what responsibilities to culture and history, if any, do you feel when it comes to taking on such a grand world as a Mesoamerican mythology and then putting your own spin on it?
There's
That's
Kevin.
I know, right? That's a tricky one because on the one hand, I want to tell a story that is not told often, but on the other hand, I also want to tell it in a way that is very modern. And like I keep calling it sword and sorcery. So it's not like I'm telling a historical fiction where I'm literally saying, here is the way life could have been, and here's the name, here's the person who lived that way, and here's the way they lived. Instead, it's kind of an exaggerated version of the people. So like one of the things that Emmanuel said when we were first planning it is like he wanted the main character to be like a hulking like the main characters from like 300 or Sin City, where it's like they're human but they're so over the top, and I like that concept. I like that idea of taking it and like why can't our ancestral culture history be treated in the same way that these other stories are told? And like I always say about 300, for example, that I find that to be one of the most realistic tellings of the story. And people are like, why? I say, because that's how the Greeks would have told their own story. They would have been like, it was the biggest of all men and the greatest of all enemies, and he was a monster who faced against me. And I'm like, that's not what actually happened, but that's how they would have said it. You know? So I like
exaggeration makes the story.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah,
so,
we want to keep it fun.
Exactly. So I don't want to say that ours is 100%, true to history. But on the flip side, when Manuel's been designing the different cultures that they're going to interact with and stuff like that, because they're going to have different cultures around like Texcoco, we're like the only frame of reference that we have historically is stuff from the colonial era on. So like from that time of the conquest, here is the way the Mexica dressed. Mm-hmm. But this is 200 years earlier, so they could have dressed differently. We don't know. So that gives us a little bit of leeway to say, yeah, maybe this is what it looked like. But it's still based on what is currently what was known later, I guess. But we're still kind of backtracking that. So it's a mixture of history and research and development with this over-the-top, superheroics kind of thing where people could survive things they really shouldn't be able to survive and fight people they shouldn't be able to fight and that kind of stuff.
Mm-hmm. Emmanuel, do you have anything to add?
No, I mean, he said it all. I mean, he's a writer after all. Like, I leave those kind of answers to him.
Every time we get up, Manuel's like, well, you're going to talk. You talk anyway.
Well, you like talking. Come on.
I do. I hate it. I mean, I don't hate it, but I mean, I have to admit it. It's like,
the question was something about the art. I'll be like, oh,
yeah.
It's about the story. So that's you, man.
Okay, well,
great at it.
Did you feel any pressure to in your depictions of the story through your art to be historically
accurate?
Correct or
not really, for the same reason that Kevin just mentioned. Like we have that freedom at the time, or like when I designed the characters, because we don't really know how they look like.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, they're just like stories that were passed by word. That's pretty much it. And I mean, with the clothes, with the buildings, like there's no reference at all. Like I know, I mean, Kevin said, what was the name of the city for the Aztecs, Kevin?
Tizapan.
Okay. He said like the only description that I got out of it is like They
It's
had a lot
covered
of
in snakes and
snakes.
plants that nobody wants to eat.
That's it. That's the description that we had. And Kevin is like, well, I mean, do like
And
a
multiple
pyramid,
sources,
like two
multiple
levels
sources have
tall.
that description.
Yeah, there you go. Yeah. So like,
Covered in snakes.
what about the buildings? Like, I don't know. Like Kevin is like, draw like a pyramid who is like two what?
I think the description was make sure it's smaller than Culhuacan. That's all that matters.
Yeah.
Because the other city is the ruling class of that area, and so it has to be. These are the underclass. They're looked down upon by the other.
San Antonio's north side.
So that's all we know. Says the guy who lives in San Antonio's north side.
Yeah. So that's it. That's why I didn't feel any pressure, to be honest. I was like, okay, well, I'm gonna drive whatever I want.
So in other words, he's still basing it on, like, he's come to me with a few things that I was unaware of, that he's like, well, I understand this is something that said a lot about part of the culture, so I'm going to incorporate that into the dress. And I was like, I didn't know about that. So he brought that in. You know, because I've mostly been researching the legends, the stories, the oral tradition, and then he's been looking into a lot of like, well, how do people look? How do they dress? What kind of hairstyles do they have? And I also put a little note to that too. Our main characters, each one of them is, again, basing it on the early 1500s. I was saying 1516. Is that the right year? The early 1500s version of the Mexica, where if you are a different rank, you have a different hairstyle and a different clothing. So it's kind of based on that, but kind of backtracking it a little bit. So like, for example, our main character is an Eagle Knight, and at the rank he's at, he should have a full body feathered suit that covers everything but his hands and feet. But it's more fun to have more of his skin showing because he's all, you know, this big built guy. So instead we just have like feathers up to here, and then it's just like, you know, you can see his chest.
Yeah.
But then one of his, yes, and his scars, all of his scars. And then one of his friends, he does have the full body armor because it just matches his personality, that he would have it on him all the time, that he's not going to be, you know, just like, hit me, man, hit me. You know, he's not that kind of guy. That's the main character. He'll do that, you know.
Actually, I wanted to ask Emmanuel, how you drew the princesses in your Kickstarter campaign page. I really like their design, but especially one of the princesses' headpiece. How did that design come about to be? Because I was absolutely in love with it.
You mean like the mask?
Well, then again,
yeah, the mask that she's wearing.
Did I put that wrong? Oh yeah, I did. Okay, well, that's something Kevin suggested, but like in general, I use the same thing that I use for my male characters. Like I exaggerated everything, like super masculine and then super feminine. That's what what we're going for. And about the mask, Kevin, do you have a reason why they were wearing a mask?
So what I did is I established them, because here's the thing. As we look at the culture of the Valley of Mexico, by the time the Spaniards get there, all of these various religions have interacted and been whole. But I'm saying that probably Huitzilopochtli is more of a Mexica god. So that is something that the Mexica definitely feel very strongly about, and that's what they're going to go with. So it doesn't really make a lot of sense that the Culhuacan, who are already there when the Mexica arrived, would have a lot of Mexica, you know, a lot of Huitzilopochtli ornamentation. So instead I told him, I gave him a list of gods and a list of animal figures, or a list of things. I said, this princess should probably have one of these types of masks. And I said, this princess should have one of these types of masks. So I think one of the options was Tlaloc, and the idea that this god would probably be much more common in this area. And again, I can't prove that, because the sources we have just kind of intermingle. All the gods are always everywhere. You know, that's where they are. Yeah. But
you're probably right, because then they had the Mayans, like more at the south, and they had Chac.
Yeah.
So by the time the Aztecs got close to Tenochtitlan or Texcoco, they already had Tlaloc. I mean, as long as I remember, the only god they brought with them was Huitzilopochtli.
Well, in the story, that's the only one they talk about bringing. In fact, they even talk about Huitzilopochtli's sister, and she doesn't show up in any other legends except for that legend. You know, so it's kind of like there were these earlier traditions that they brought with them to the Valley of Mexico that's their culture, and so that's why I was like telling him like because the princesses are from the ruling class. They're from that upper class city that looks down on the Mexica. You know, so they would have different ornamentation than what the Mexica would have. That was the idea there. That's a long.
So, and again, you briefly touched upon it, but did you speak to any Mexican Nahuan people during the creation and research process, or was it all derived from published works or your own personal knowledge?
Well, the personal knowledge part only came in the pre-planning, of like, yeah, I want to do this because I've heard it before. But since we are looking at a legend that again is from the 1300s, it is primarily from research I would say most of the research was published before the year 1700. But I also have a degree that incorporates anthropology into it, and that's where I focus in my master's degree, and that's where I focus that anthropology history.
Okay.
I definitely would like to incorporate more of that, and I would be more than happy to bring that in. Unfortunately, especially considering that we're doing this during a time when travel is not really that easy, that has not been as feasible as I'd like it to be. That being said, I have been talking to activists and historians and folklorists that do cover more of this. And I said, okay, is this a fair thing? Is this part something that works? But then again, that ties back to what we were saying earlier, that we are telling this older legend and kind of putting it through a little bit of a modern lens while still using as much of the historical culture as we can.
Mm-hmm. And it helps that not a lot is actually known about them. So you can kind
Gives
of...
us some leeway.
Yeah, you can kind of do whatever you want, as Emmanuel said.
You've mentioned in wanting to prioritize equality when it comes to portraying smart, strong female characters in your book. What are some of the things that you've considered in creating your female characters? I know that, Emmanuel, you were saying that you were drawing the men really masculine and the females really feminine. What was your thought process in creating strong female characters?
Well, I mean, just to be clear, when I say like super feminine, that's just the way they look. Because in reality, they're really, really strong women. The way Kevin wrote the characters was really good. I mean, they're just like the main princess. She's not even into the guys. She's like I don't care about you guys. She's kind of mean. She's that type of woman. Like, no, like I can do it by myself. But then again,
to get the idea, it's like when we first see them, the men are all about battle. And the women are just in the distance of like, oh, look how pretty they are in the distance. The idea is that by the time we get to chapter 2 on, they are equal in terms of being main characters. And the idea is that while yes, they are exaggerated personalities, there is never a situation where it's like, save the princess, she needs saved, and if you know anything about the story of, the various versions of the story of Tenochtitlan, some bad stuff happens to a princess. And I am going to take some leeway with it and give us a happy ending after that. So it's like, there is like, by the way, when I say bad stuff, I'm specifically talking about death, just to be clear. One thing that I find very, very interesting is that in all of the stories that I've read from Mesoamerican mythology, rape does not come up. Where it's like all over Norse and Greek mythology. They can't have enough of it in Greek mythology.
Well, he was punished.
I mean, no. Yeah, it was severely punished. Like that's literally the only place it's come up is where it gets punished. That's the only time it comes up. It's not like Zeus did this and it was great. It's like that doesn't happen. So yes, she somebody is going to die. But because I'm tying it to the gods, I get to have that freedom of having what happens after death that can be a better, greater story. And so the idea is that, yeah, it's like there's going to be some dark moments toward the end, but we're coming somewhere with it. We're heading somewhere with it is the idea.
Thank you for that clarification.
Yeah. It's like I said, in a different story, like I said, the story that I'd like to do in the future, the one I was talking about, that one, none of that applies. There's no hyper masculine, hyper feminine. It's a very different thing. But for this story, that's what needed to be done because this story is about telling this kind of Conan the Barbarian epic history of like, this is how we did this. And so you kind of have to over the top exaggerate it. But the characters in themselves have much more nuance as we get to know them, which is part of the problem is that we talked about how long could the story be. When we first talked about it, we're talking about maybe, 3-4 chapters. As I was doing research, I was like, Emmanuel, we're talking about 7 or 8 chapters. And he's like, yes, let's do the entire thing. We'll see. We'll see how far. We may have to cut it down a little bit, but it definitely we want it to be long enough to have the characters develop and be able to have full stories and full personalities.
6 will be fine. I'll be
probably 6. Yeah, we'll probably cut it down to 6. We'll cut out a few scenes and keep it there.
Well, there's so much information that I'm sure you want to impart, and there's so much that I know that I want to know, and I can't wait to read the story. But can you help our listeners to best find your Kickstarter? How can they support you? And also, most importantly, by when do they need to support you? When does this Kickstarter end?
We have 25 more days, right, Kevin? 26, something like. Okay.
Yeah.
So almost a month, And you can find us on Kickstarter.com, and you can go to the search bar and just type Teoatl. Kevin?
Well, you can find it at kickstarter.com/project/monomythic. Also, facebook.com/monomythic. Monomythic.com is a website that I created about 10 years ago, just so I could talk about whatever I want to talk about. Mostly stories of myth and legend and heroes, but also modern, talking to modern creators about how they created superheroes and stuff like that. And so basically, I tried it, just Googling Teoatl. That's not a common phrase in English, so it's like
that's easier. Just go to Google and type Teoatl.
Yeah, and that's one of those things where it's like when we were debating the name, that I wasn't sold on it immediately, but then I realized it's such a unique spelling that it'd be okay.
So just to clarify for listeners, or watchers, because we're going to be on YouTube, it's Teoatl. And yes, it was very easy. That's all I did is Googled that, and everything came up, and I was able to find it very easily. So, go ahead.
Where can listeners find your projects, future projects, website, social media is all, you've already told us all about that. It was such a pleasure listening all about the story, about how it came to be, about all the research you've done, and how you guys actually met at a convention and started to work together. So thank you so much for being on our YouTube channel, Las Platicas, and hopefully we can have more funds on this project in order to get more of these, what are they called again?
Rewards?
Yes, rewards. Thank you.
We're talking about, as the project begins to wrap up closer to the end, we're talking about adding rewards and adding stuff like that. We want to see where it goes, because I want to make sure as much of it as possible goes into making the project get bigger, as opposed to spending it on other types of printing. So I want to see where we can go with that first, and then add more to rewards and things like that. As far as finding us on the internet, I've got kevingarcia.com, but also Monomythic on YouTube, Facebook, and mainly YouTube and Facebook, to be honest. I don't really use Twitter and Instagram. Emmanuel, though, has a very unique name, and he's got his own website, his Instagram, his Facebook. If you look up his name, it's always him, and I can't do that with Kevin Garcia. You look up Kevin Garcia there. I hate that when I Google myself, it takes me way too long to find my picture, whereas Emmanuel, it's all him.
Yeah, you can find me as Emmanuel Valtierra Illustrator, and that's the name for my Facebook fan page, for my Instagram, for my website. Maybe the only one that's different is my YouTube channel, which is Códices Aztecas or Aztec Codex. Besides that, it's all Emmanuel Valtierra Illustrator. Wow.
On his YouTube channel, he's been directing some short animated films about retelling some legends of the Nahuas, both modern and ancient. So those are really, really cool. Definitely amazing. Check those out. Those are really cool. I've been sharing those on my Facebook page because I just love them.
Awesome. All right, guys. Thank you guys so much for being on our show. We really appreciate it. This has been Las Platicas, and we have been your hosts. I'm Sarah.
I'm Kristen.
And I'm Jen.
And I was Emmanuel Valtierra.
And I'm Kevin Garcia. Thank you for joining us on Comadres eComics. Please remember to like and subscribe and ring that bell and do all those other YouTube things.
Thanks, guys.
Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Sweet. Wait.
Okay.